Well, hi, it's Simon Breakspear, and I'm thrilled to be joining you in this digital format to explore a little bit about leadership agility, both during and beyond the pandemic. I first really got interested as a researcher and as someone who works with hundreds of schools in different parts of the world, got interested in the concept of agility because I could see that a lot of leaders, they were really clear about the what of school improvement. They had really compelling ideas and, aspirations for what they wanted to do in their schools. Shifts in learner outcomes, shifts in teaching practice and collaboration, other views about how they wanted to become a more dynamic learning community. They had the what, but they were often struggling with the how. Because you see, school improvement is complex, it's human, and it's messy. And many of the approaches that these school leadership teams had been given by well-meaning systems or senior leaders, they were just too rigid to really think through how to lead school improvement, given the deeply human complexity of it all. Too often we thought about strategy or planning as something you did maybe once every 3 or 4 years in a really deep way. And then implementation was this long period that stretched out over multiple years. And then maybe you'd get to evaluation if you were lucky to see whether it worked. As though that the improvement of schools was something that occurred in a stable environment. And what we needed to do was do our thinking, do our implementation, and then at some point, check whether or not we had the impact. But of course, on the ground, school leaders were telling me, look, Simon, student learning isn't necessarily this sort of simple, linear, predictable thing. And helping educators, including ourselves, change our practice and our beliefs and how we enact our work in the classroom, that takes a bit of time and effort. And sometimes we build capability, but that capability doesn't stay where you built it. People move on to other places, or we're just starting to get a roll on, and then there's a shift in, for example, policy or funding or a priority coming down from the system, and we've got to adjust and move. And there's a sense where even before the pandemic, people were saying we need approaches that were a little bit more agile, a little bit more reflective, allowed us to move and adjust over time. So my team and I, since around 2015 actually, have been teaching teams these new ways of working. And when we think about agility, what I'm really referring to here is sort of learning from both what we can draw on from the research evidence base and combining that with the best available processes from agile ways of working and from improvement science. And the way I think about agility playing out, and this is even before the pandemic, is that when we think about being agile leaders and working in agile leadership teams, it's about collaborative work that combines two really important things. It's around strategic clarity. So being agile isn't about being flippant. Hey, I'm agile. We're working on this today, and now we're often working on this. No, often being agile first starts with real clarity, strategic clarity about the impact we're trying to have. It's not always all the way down to something that's deeply precise. It might start off being something a little bit broader that needs still further refinement. But agility is about that strategic clarity, but then also combining that with implementation flexibility. And so an agile leader, an agile team needs to find ways to step into this way of working where together collectively we can get clearer about what we're trying to do, but then also have some flex, have the ability to adjust and to pivot because of the normal human complexity of our work. And so one way of thinking about this and what we were teaching 2015 to 2019 to literally thousands of school improvement teams is a simple improvement model that says first we need to get our mindsets right, our mindsets that are able to deal with this complexity. And then as a team, we should see improvement work as not so much we do our strategy, then we do our implementation, and then finally we get around to do some evaluation. No, school improvement work is much better off being seen as an iterative, responsive process where we do a bit of thinking, then we get into some doing, And in that doing, we're going to learn a lot about how our ideas actually play out in the real world. And we're going to learn a lot, and then we're going to move to the next step. And so what we're thinking together and what we're thinking through collectively here is how we can make serious progress in our work by being leaders who can, I guess, step into and lead through an iterative process where often we need to lean into the work before we have all the answers. And we need to know that a lot of the things we're going to need to know in order to make our ideas work in our school, we're not going to know until we get deeper into the application, testing, and exploring. You know, I was a little bit nervous actually when I first started to talk about agile leadership, said about 5 or 6 years ago, because sometimes I thought, will this term really land within the profession? But a lot of school leaders came up to me and they said, Simon, look, I wasn't using that term before, but I've always had to be agile. Often I've had a pretty cool intent for the day, like I've been clear about what I wanted to do. But days in school are so dynamic, and often whatever I'd planned out, won't quite be able to happen on the timeline that I wanted, but I can still achieve my intended impact. And I think that's really close to what I'm referring to here about all forms of school improvement, that as school leaders, we're actually really good at being agile. And what we actually need is a set of tools and resources to allow us to do it. But then, of course, COVID hit. And on top of that human, messy complexity of it all, we started to also need to navigate a lot of external uncertainty. And it's been incredible, hasn't it? As we've watched both jurisdictions overseas, across Australia, and then you've also navigated, even navigating today, this week, around the ongoing uncertainty. And so whilst before we had complexity and the ability for things to move, maybe there was a new political leadership and over a year, there was a redirection of what we were working on. But now I'm working with teams that today aren't sure whether they'll be in person or remote learning by the end of this week. They're not sure necessarily how many staff they might have or which kids they might have on site. And so the levels of uncertainty are at the level that we've never had before in education. And so now is, of course, the time to keep using agile approaches that work under normal conditions just to navigate human complexity. But now we need them more than ever as we navigate that external uncertainty. If COVID's taught us anything, I think it's shown us that the traditional ways that we've often been encouraged as school leaders to lead school change and to lead improvement have become completely redundant. Where before I would have told you that, look, writing these 4-year, 3-year plans, whilst it's good to think about the future, it's kind of feels a bit odd, doesn't it, to sometimes think about so far into the future with such detail. But now it's really difficult to often even write a 4 to 6 week plan and to know necessarily where things are going to play out. So whilst before I think being agile was a wise thing to do, now during COVID and during the long tail of the challenges that we're facing, agile is the only real way forward. I say that agility is the best response to complexity and uncertainty. It doesn't get rid of the complexity. It doesn't ignore the complexity and uncertainty, but it lets us sort of lean into that complexity. It lets us tolerate some of that ambiguity, and it gives us a more dynamic stance to be able to navigate things that are coming. So what are some practical things, if you wanted to get into these ways of thinking and working, that you could take into your own team leadership and start to consider, how to actually apply this work to your context? So the first thing about becoming a more agile leader, and particularly being a more agile team, is about your ways of being. What are your general responses or dispositions in response to complexity and uncertainty? When you're faced with complexity, when things are shifting on you, what might be our natural reactions, or what could become our behavioral dispositions? And there's 4 key agile mindsets that we're often using in our work with leaders around the world. And I want to share those briefly with you. That when you're up against high levels of complexity and uncertainty, these 4 mindsets can help you really lean into that and to make progress. So the first one is all about sense making. But one of the important things when the landscape, if I can use that as shifting on you, is to keep sense making and trying to work out, well, what has changed and what really matters at this point? You know, the sense making is about sort of picking up your environment and scanning and trying to make a decision, what really matters now and what is meaningfully shifted. The agile leader and the agile team is trying to work out where they are in the landscape now, how things have shifted, so that then they can make the next best decision. So the first one is about being a sense maker. The second one is about focusing and realizing that as an agile leader, we want to focus on sort of better. We want to pursue less but better and work on only the most essential things. And so as things are shifting on us and as things are complex, we're always asking, what's essential to do now? What's essential to do now? And where might there be some high leverage for us to go after? Number 3 is about testing. And this is about starting small, moving fast, and failing well. Rather than getting caught in overthinking, we want to, wherever possible as an agile leader, have a sort of disposition towards testing our ideas out in the real world, running some little experiments. Not just sort of thinking it through, but thinking it through and then getting in and working out what are our best next moves and what can we test out. And then lastly, iterating. And iteration is about embracing the fact that we're going to have to update and refine over time, that it's okay. And in fact, it's expected to not quite get things right the first time. And it's the speed by which we can learn, adjust, and get out a better solution. And so when you think about having a lot of complexity and uncertainty coming at you, one of the important things is to, I guess, develop these dispositions about responding to that by sense making, focusing, testing, and iterating. But then within our model, we often help people really step into new ways of thinking and new ways of acting as they team together. So a more agile way of thinking about strategy for me is just clear thinking. That we need to set aside small pockets of time, they don't have to be more than 20 minutes, to really figure out our improvement ideas, to just get sharper and more precise about what we're even trying to do. A super simple tool that we often use is what I call the Clarify Canvas. And in this, we just take any improvement idea, whether it's a short, quick idea that we might want to roll out next week, or whether it's a longer term thing that we think might be part of our core work as a school improvement team over a good couple of years. And we try to just to say, can we answer these 4 key questions? Mark Twain was said to have said, I didn't have time to write you a short letter, so I wrote you a long one instead. And I think often in school improvement planning, we can write a 10-page plan, but not actually be clear in our mind. And yet on the Clarify Canvas, we've got to get sharp about what's the impact we want to have, the problem we want to solve, the change we want to make, and the evidence, those indicators that we might know whether things are on track. So the first step of sort of stepping into more agile action here is to clarify our thinking. That so often I see challenges around implementation simply because we haven't really got tight about the ideas we're trying to implement. And then what we've learned by both research and in the field is that then we need to more regularly step into some responsive action. And responsive action is about seeing that implementation, it's not so much about delivery, but about collective learning. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to take our idea, a little idea we've got as a team or maybe for the whole school, and we want to quickly get it out of the real world and move through some cycles where we're trying it out, we're learning about what's working and not working, and then we're taking the next step. We're planning, what are the essential things to do next? We're doing and actually delivering, cutting through and getting something done. And then we're actually reflecting and learning from that last course of action. You know, I think teachers model this kind of behavior brilliantly. Great educators plan out what they want in the next term or the next scope and sequence, and they think carefully about what they want to teach and how they want to teach it and how they're going to collect some evidence of impact. And then they teach, and as soon as they're into the first lesson, they're already making adjustments and responses based on how students are responding to what they're teaching, whether those students have that prior knowledge, and what the feedback evidence is telling them. And then over time, they're adjusting. And I think as school improvement people, whether in schools or in systems, we've got to model that responsive type work where what we're doing is we're getting in and we're planning, okay, what's the next most important level of work we're doing over the next 5 weeks or 10 weeks? Okay, how do we actually make sure as a leadership team we follow through and we create some feedback loops to learn from what's working and not working? And then at the end, we need to learn. We need to learn by studying variability about what's working, with whom, under what conditions, collecting some formative evaluation evidence, and then coming in and using that to guide the next piece of work. If you think about what this might look like over a series of cycles, whether these are each term or maybe during more complex times, you're actually running faster cycles than every term. You as a school improvement team, each and every time a plan, do, learn, plan, do, learn, plan, do, learn. And what you're developing over time is your own team know-how about how to make this work in context. And so from my perspective, this work of moving back from thinking to doing and then doing back to thinking is at the core of iterative work. It says we can figure it out over time, friends. We don't have to have it all right. But bit by bit, we need to be willing to update, to iterate, and to improve based on the evidence of what's working and not working. Well, the last piece that we've seen to be really important as we step into more agile work is to actually put a key focus on our empowered teamwork. School teams are interesting because we often don't choose our teams. We don't necessarily choose who's going to be working in them. And we've often got people who've been around for a long time in our institutions. And our job as members of teams or as leaders of teams is to actually team the teams we're in. And by this, I'm referring here to the need to think about the quality of our teamwork, and particularly as we're navigating complexity and uncertainty. For me, getting better at teamwork isn't just something where we wish this team could do certain things, but rather we take responsibility to team the teams that we're in. And it's worthwhile every 10 weeks or so reflecting not just on what you've done as a team, but how you're working as a team, and to explore together how you might enhance the quality of your teamwork. Two areas that we find are really worth always reflecting on. One of them is around strategic direction. Especially when things are in flux and moving, you might have a plan, but don't confuse having a written plan for having true alignment. That it's crucial to keep coming back together and saying, is everyone clear about where we're going and what's important now? And the other one is around psychological safety. The need for us to build teams where it's okay to speak up, to challenge, to offer diverse perspectives. Because if teams are going to learn their way into improvement, they're going to need to have a platform of psychological safety to be able to do that deeper level work. It's never been a more challenging, but also wonderful time to be in the work of school leadership. As leaders, we've always had to navigate the human complexity of school change. But now, over the last period of time, we're also having to navigate that enhanced external uncertainty. And so I think it's time more than ever before to start to build agile improvement teams in our schools, where we have some clear new ways of working that are practical and easy for people to pick up and become habits and routines of the ways that we work. Because if during the most challenging times, we can start to pick up these new ways of working, the ways of being in our mindsets, the ways of thinking, the ways of taking action, the way of working as teams, we're going to be able to navigate the challenges and uncertainty of the pandemic, but then on the other side, accelerate with new levels of innovation and ways of actually creating higher levels and faster levels of change in our institutions. Because as we are becoming increasingly more agile leaders of learning, we're also building organizations that are more agile organizations. And I think that's what we've been seeing, haven't we, over the last couple of months especially, that our leaders are responding to complexity and uncertainty, and we're also building organizations, we're building schools that are more agile, more adaptive, and more able to both solve current challenges, but also be ready to adapt and adjust for things that come into the future. So step into agility, whether you've been calling it that or not. I think these ways of working are exactly what school leadership teams need in order to get cut through and create meaningful progress.